I like to bring together a lot of the concepts I've tried to convey to you, the experience of other parents, so that you can approach dealing with your teenagers and young adult children competently and confidently. How many of you do not have teenage kids yet? Your children are still very young. Wonderful. You know, in my experience, teenagers have gotten a really bad press. There are so many books that are written in my country by experts who talk about the teenage rebellion and the teenage problems, and have conveyed a lot of fear in the minds of many parents today. In my experience, teenagers are not much different from other adults. They have some problems, to be sure, and I'll get to those in just a couple minutes. But you know, I think an awful lot of the experts who assume that teenagers are going to turn out badly are people who, just by their very nature themselves, raise brats. And so they take their own personal experience, and that of their friends, and they generalize upon it. I've had parents, you know, tell me after their kids have grown and gone, they have said, you know, I remember one mother in particular, she said, you know, I kept waiting for this adolescent rebellion to take place, and it never did. Oh, we had our shouting matches from time to time. We got angry with each other, but half the time it was my fault. An awful lot of what happens is, you see, teenagers are really near adults. And the parents I have seen who've had the most success with their teenage kids, even with all their ups and downs, are people who, going back to my first talk, people who have always wanted their kids to be adults, who always look forward to their children growing up to be competent, responsible young men and women, and who now, you know, as they see their young son, you know, have his voice change, you know, and his shoulders get broad and kind of sulky look in his eye, they realize we're coming down the home stretch. You know, or your young daughter, you know, goes from being a little girl, suddenly is a willowy, young, beautiful young lady, but doesn't know it. When you see your kids become adolescents, you can take a certain measure of peace and pride. You know, we're almost there. You know, what we have to do now is be ready to launch them out into the world so that they have concern for others. We've come this far. Now we have to really treat them as adults in everything but experience. You see, you know, somebody once said that I think it's true, that anytime you have tension in human affairs, it's because there's some truth that is being either denied or ignored. And in our society, yours as well as mine, the truth that is generally ignored is that young people in the teenage years, in 13, 14, 15 through 17, are really young adults. If they'd been living 100 years ago, they would have been working for a living, they would have been thinking of getting married very soon. But now we have extended the period where they move out of the house and, you know, live independently, or, you know, rather dependently, because we're never really independent. That's something teenagers don't understand. You know, we go from being dependent to interdependent. You know, we go from being dependent on our parents to, in many ways, interdependent with other people who depend on us as well. That's what adult life is really all about. Anyway, if you treat your children as adults in the making, they respond to that. They're very grateful for it. And you have dealings, wonderful dealings with them. This leads us to understand, where do the problems come from, though? You know, because it's the universal experience, virtually, that teenagers can be sulky, they can be nasty, you know, they can mope around the house. This energetic, happy little boy that you have, the age of 13, you know, suddenly walks around like a Cro-Magnon, you know, like some kind of shaven ape dragging his knuckles behind him. Well, you know, what happens is this. I think most of the basic problems, even with very, very good kids from very good families, most of the basic problems teenagers have are essentially biochemical. Biochemicals going on inside their brain. You see, psychiatrists and psychologists have pointed out that there are two stages in young people's lives when the rapid growth produced by hormones, produced by biochemicals going through the system, causes various psychoactive results. That is, there are mood swings, crankiness, an introspection, a resistance to authority, a kind of wildness, a kind of temporary insanity, a lunacy from time to time. The first of these that accompanies growth is between the ages of 2 and 5. Just think about it. You just think what it's like dealing with a 3 or 4-year-old son or daughter, especially when there's low overhead pressure for a time. The thing is, the second time in life is really a replay of this. They're starting from the ages of 11 to about 17, and especially 13 to 15, with boys as well as girls. Rapid growth, rapid bodily changes has about the same effect on their psyche as it did when they were about 3 years old. Mood swings, resistance to authority, desire for change, and introspection sometimes. A kind of mild manic depressive syndrome, that goes along. They look in the mirror, and they're not sure they like what they see looking back. And the curious thing is that some psychiatrists even say there's a third time of life when this happens. Not as strongly and not as wildly, and not in everybody, but it does happen. It happens around the age of 40, give or take a few years. I see some people looking a little worried here. Where changes in the body, cause, emotional swings, problems, an existential problem. What is my life all about? The same as teenagers. You look in the mirror, you don't like what you see looking back, a few gray hairs. Takes a little longer with a little huffing and puffing to go up and down stairs. Age is setting in. And you're leaving part of your past behind you, and who knows what's ahead. It's almost identical. The curious thing that happens in many families is at the same time that parents are going through their problems, the kids are going through theirs as teenagers. So there are a lot of unnecessary frictions. All over the house, you get people looking in the mirror. They don't like what they see. They get on each other's nerves. And an awful lot of the problems in families with teenagers comes about, from just plain fatigue. Teenagers need more sleep than kids need more sleep at the age of 13 than they did at the age of 9, about an hour more, and most of them don't get it. And when kids do get enough sleep and do get enough exercise and enough nutritious meals, they have much more peace of mind and better able to study, better able to deal with others. So if your son, is sulking around, or unnecessarily cranky, consider it as basically a physical problem that he has. I mean, heck, I think most parents would agree that the biggest single cause of friction in most families is just plain physical tiredness. People just get plain tired and cranky. I knew a mother one time who said one time she was standing in her kitchen while her 15-year-old son, was standing there blowing his stack about something. You never do this for me, you never do that, what you do, you don't trust me. And she's looking at him, carrying on like this. She's controlled her temper. And she thinks to herself, where have I seen him like this before? He was exactly like this when he was 3 years old. Same thing, ranting and raving, unreasonable, wanting his way, cranky, irritable. What did he need then? He needed affection, patience, understanding, sleep, food. He needed a lot of food. And so she turned to her son and she says, there's the replay. It's just that he's 15 now. He's almost 6 feet tall, and it's just much, much uglier, when he's bigger. So she said, listen, sit down, let's have a sandwich and talk about it. So he sat down, she made a nice big sandwich, he wolfed it down, and he got much, much better. Felt much better. She said, listen, why don't you go up and just sack out, go to your bed and just sack out for about a half an hour. Don't call it a nap, whatever you do, all right? Just go and, rest your eyes. That's a wonderful, my mother used to say that, I'm going to rest my eyes for a few minutes. When they're really, really good, when you've done your job, underneath all of that crankiness and everything, they're just terrific young people, just coming to the fore. See, what I'm really saying is when your children are young, if there's a certain trajectory to the way you're dealing with them, everything comes together when they're teenagers. And when they leave home at age 16, 17, 18, they're set. I mean, what you are at 16 is pretty much what you're going to be for the rest of your life. Let's face it. And for instance, all teenagers will say, "Why don't you trust me?" We all said that to our parents. You'll hear them say it to you. "Why don't you trust me? You don't trust me. You won't let me go out with my friends. My kids are going to a party. Why don't you trust me to go along with them?" And you see, what you can say to your children is, "We do trust you. We trust your integrity. Always have, always will. We have trusted your earnest good intentions, your intention to do the right thing, and we've always trusted that you tell your word, tell the truth on your honor. Of course we trust your integrity. It's your judgment we don't trust." You distinguish between judgment and integrity. All right, it's their judgment. 9 out of 10 serious problems teenagers have come from bad judgment, not malice. They just do dumb things. Like these kids I told you about, driving. Simple things. They're driving along in the car, and they are playing with recently with the license, and they're playing with the tape deck, or the radio, as if they were still passengers. Habits are kind of hard to break. When I was growing up, those of you who are young parents here may find this hard to believe, there was only AM radio, right? And there were just a few buttons there, and that's all it was. You could feel what you wanted to listen to. Today, the tape deck, CD player, it looks like the cockpit of a 747. And tiny little buttons with tiny little print. So a lot of kids just get into serious accidents because, in a dumb way, they are still treating the tape deck as if they were sitting there as a passenger. Bad experience. Kids will go, and some people will say, you got to try some drugs, have to try some drink, and just because they're afraid to be different from everybody else, they'll go along with it. Bad judgment. They don't mean to do the wrong thing, they just don't know what it is. So therefore, you tell them, look, good judgment comes with experience. You're almost there. You're 95% there. It's just that the last 5% of what you do could do serious damage to you. And that's why we have to ask you to trust us, trust our judgment. Paradoxically, and I've told this to teenagers, when you trust your parents' judgment and submit to their loving authority, then, paradoxically, they see, aha, he really does have good judgment. He really can be trusted. Okay, son, you want to go to the party? Go to it. It's like if you're walking your dog on a leash someplace, all right, in a park, and the dog is snarling and yelling, and making all kinds, pulling away like this, you're not going to let him off the leash. But when you have him on the leash and he's trotting along beside you, looking up, he's sticking with you, happy and so forth, sure, you let him off the leash. Let him run around. The wilder you are, the more trouble you're making for yourself. Tell that to your teenagers. And hold your ground, And don't forget, when you're 15 years old, 2 years is a very, very long time. They haven't learned yet. Every year goes faster and faster. It comes up to them. Now, another thing, when you're dealing with your teenager, if you're treating them like adults, this means you treat them with respect for their rights. Now, kids do have rights. Young people do have rights, not because they're kids and not because they're teenagers, but because they're people. They have a right to presumption of innocence. That if you have to listen to their side of things. They have a right not to be publicly embarrassed. You remember what the little girl said, in this the thing? Make your corrections personally and privately. Because remember, teenagers are very sensitive to what other people think of them. And if they're put on the spot, they're not listening to you. They're so upset at being publicly embarrassed. They have a right, to have reasonable punishment. If they've done something wrong and you have a temper and you assign a serious punishment for them, all right, and then you realize afterwards and you've calmed down, that's too much. Go back and apologize. Say, I'm sorry I went too far. Your punishment was too severe. Let's cut it back to this. Instead of being grounded for the next 2 years, we'll make it for the next 2 weeks. Okay? Don't be afraid to apologize to your teenagers. They will respect you for it. And don't think they will think I'm inconsistent. No. They will understand that you're trying to be consistent in being fair. You consistently try to be fair. And because you respect justice and you respect their rights and you respect the truth, When you've done wrong, you go to them and you apologize. They will love you and respect you and imitate you in that. And that could save their marriage. So treat them like adults and realize most of their mistakes, most of the things they do wrong are mistaken. Can I give you just a little anecdote here that illustrates this process? You know, the dynamic that takes place in a family. Let's imagine a situation. It's by no means, now this is an American example. I mean, you make the changes in your own mind as to what happens. A young fellow who's, let's say, 15 years old is going to a dance someplace, you know, given by his school or club or whatever he belongs to. And it's a Friday night. His parents, being smart parents, don't say to him, you must be back by 11:30. Rather, they say, let's negotiate a reasonable time. The word reasonable is very important to teenagers, and it's very convincing, too. Let's do something reasonable. What time would you like to stay out with, too? He said, oh, maybe 1, 1:30, 2. All right, we would like you back here by 11. So let's compromise. 11:45. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, fine, 11:45. I mean, it's like, you know, as long, from that point on, of course, his getting home is not a matter of obeying your curfew. It is a matter of his keeping his word. Do you see? It's a big difference. You incite them to keep their word. You know, they said they'd be back, and that's what you're going to hold them to, all right? All right, so then the young kid goes to the dance. And there's an understanding. Somebody else is going to drop him home. There's an understanding if he can't be there on time, he will call. So it comes to be, the dance is over at 11, it's 10 to 11. He says, gee, the other kids are saying, let's stop by a restaurant, get something to eat on the way back. He says, well, I might be late. I don't know if I can make it back. I better call. So he goes to the phone. He doesn't have a cell phone. He goes to a pay phone, and there are 3 kids waiting to use it. Whoops, I better come back later. I'm not going to stand in line for 3 people. So he goes and he finishes the dance. Then he comes back when it's over and he finds there are 15 people waiting to use the line, all right? Big mistake. He will learn from that mistake, all right? He should have learned in the first place. Now he'll know better. Better to do it now than later. All right, so his friends are honking the horn. He gets in the car with them. They go driving around. He says, I'll call from the restaurant. He gets to the restaurant. It's now 11:30, and he finds, there is no phone there. Whoops, he can't call. So they have something to eat. I know I'm going to be in trouble. I better call. So he gets on the road. It gets dropped off at people's houses. Nothing quite works. By this time it's 12:30, quarter to 1, all right, or close to 1 o'clock. And he's on his way home. Now, meanwhile, back home, the following thing is playing out. The mother and the father are up waiting for him. The mother is frantic with worry. One of the things boys have to be told by their dads, have to understand, is mothers worry. All right? Rain makes things wet. The sun is hot. Mothers worry. It's just part of nature. God help us all, if they ever stop worrying. It's what makes the world go round. It's part of their love. So she's thinking, she's picturing the ambulance with the bloody gurney being pulled into the emergency room. Haven't heard anything. The husband is sitting there, and he just wants to get to bed. He's dead tired. He knows this is probably just some teenage, typical baloney, they get into some kind of mess. He'll be home any minute or whatever. He is starting to get increasingly frustrated, though, because his wife is out of control with this. And men hate out-of-control situations. He's trying to reason with her, and she's being unreasonable, all right? Because love is sometimes unreasonable. Love is sometimes irrational. So he says, wait till I get my hand on that kid. He's keeping me from getting to sleep. She's all upset about it. He said he would call. He didn't. So then they're waiting and waiting. Finally, at, 10 minutes to 1, the door opens, and the son tiptoes in very sheepishly. And, of course, mother and father both relieved. He's safe and sound. He isn't in an intensive care unit. So the mother comes up to him, and she says, where have you been? We've been waiting. Why didn't you call? All of her fury, pent up, comes out. And the boy starts to explain, all right? Now, you heard it took me 3 minutes to explain it. He has to go into a Byzantine complexity of an explanation as to what happened. Because the lives of teenagers are usually more complicated than our own, and they're a lot dependent on other factors. So he starts into his explanation. She has had enough waiting for the evening. So she interrupts and says, "You said you would call. Why didn't you call?" Now, he suddenly has this male outrage at unfairness. All right? He is trying to explain, and she won't let him finish his explanation. So therefore, he is being deprived of something to which he has a right, despite whatever he did wrong. He has a right to presumption of innocence. He's been having that right stripped from him. She won't let him tell his side of the story. All right? Now, fairness is very, very important to males. That's why sports, is nothing but fair compliance with rules, with laws. So he then starts talking angrily with her, shouting back, "I'm trying to explain. Why don't you listen to me?" Now, the husband, who's been standing back there wearily, watching this scene unfold, suddenly hears something that bothers him a lot as a male, aside from the fact that he's tired. He hears an adult male voice, albeit coming from his son, speaking in a disrespectful way to his wife. Now, this triggers a reaction someplace in the medulla oblongata, someplace in the center of the brain. It is just hardwired as an instinct into men that whenever they hear a male voice speaking in an aggressive and disrespectful way to any woman whom they love, mother, sisters, girlfriend, wife, daughters, it starts a chain reaction of adrenaline inside of them such that they suddenly want to reach out and touch someone. Their immediate instinctive reaction is to rearrange the guy's face. So when the father hears his son talking like that to his wife, it is something he literally cannot stand. So he then steps forward, puts his fingers in his son's chest, and pushes him back and says, "Don't talk to your mother that way." Now the wife, in the meantime, has just seen this, and that triggers a defensive reaction in her. She looks over and she sees the muscles tensing in her husband, his jaw clenched, the fire in his eyes, his hand reaching out to her little boy. And she thinks, my little son is about to get clobbered. Now, since she cannot physically intervene with her husband, she falls back on her feminine skills verbally. And she suddenly launches a verbal flank attack to distract him. She swirls onto her husband and says, "Easy to see where he gets it. You're not so hot about calling up yourself, Now her husband, suddenly being accused of being the source of this problem, by not ringing up often enough himself, which may be the truth, he's come to his wife's defense, and then suddenly she stabs him in the back. So he turns around to her, and he's in a state of apoplectic fury. So you have these three people standing in the hallway who love each other, would die for each other, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs. And it's all so unnecessary. Now, how could this have been handled better? Well, like this, You wait for your son, you get upset and so forth. You presume personal best effort. You always have. Remember I told you that? That's part of the family? So when he walks in the door, you try to control your temper and go up to him, either mother or father, and say, "We have just one question for you. Well, we're glad to have you home. We're happy. We were worried about you." All right? And worry is part of love. People don't worry, don't love. We're worried about you. And we just want to know one thing. Did you try to call? Did you try to call? And the son can honestly say, "Yes, I did." Okay? That's enough for you. Personal best effort. Just say, "All right, let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's all get to bed. We're all tired. We'll talk about it tomorrow evening." In other words, deflect the argument. Put it off. Things tend to cool when you set them aside, whether it's a cup of tea or a fight. Set the thing aside. So the son then goes upstairs, and he's lying awake in bed with his eyes staring at the ceiling, thinking of how he's going to defend himself. And when all is said and done, isn't that a punishment enough? Say, you know another good tactic with teenagers? When they've done something they ought not to have, ask them what punishment they think would be fair. What would be reasonable? You know, you'd be surprised how often they will come up with a degree of severity or a punishment that is approximately what you would have come up with yourself, and if anything, harsher than what you would have come up with. All right? They have got to see you're correcting the fault, not them personally. All right? And after they've done something, made apologies, correct, you absolutely forget about it. You love each other back, and they're back in the good graces with you. And don't forget, I mean, boys especially can do things wrong of breathtaking stupidity. Absolutely awful stupidity. And they do it mostly to show off with each other. I had the experience one time when I was headmaster of the school in Chicago. It was a boys' school. See, I like teenagers. I really do, honestly. I think they're just absolutely charming. Human nature is right there close to the surface. And they have their whole lives ahead of them. They really do have idealism. And underneath all the surliness, the Cro-Magnon look and everything else, they really do have wonderful hearts. But, there were certain complexities going on. Here's one instance, for instance. I had one of our boys was 15. By the way, 15 is the utter pits of human existence for males. Huh? Absolute pits. 13 to 15, in that age. The young boy was brought, a teacher came in with a 15-year-old, was very upset at having obviously been just caught at something. And he said, the boy sat down. What did he do wrong? He had been walking with a bunch of his pals past a car out in the parking lot, the car park, had taken a banana that was left after lunch and just squished it on the windshield. It was the teacher's parking area. Just, squished it like that to the great amusement of all of his friends. And the other teacher caught him doing it, brought him back in. It was my car. And the young fellow knew it was my car. So I said to him, so tell me, Joe, why did you do this to me? Why did you smear that thing in the car? I have always tried to be honest and fair with you, and I've told you if I'm not being fair with you to let me know about it. Why have you done this to me? It's just not fair. It's not just. He said, well, I don't know. So I said, now, answer me this. If you'd not had your buddies with you as you were walking along, would you have done it? He said, no, of course not. Well, that's a cue as to why you were doing it. You were doing it to show off. You see, there seems to be a need in young males of this age to occasionally do something dangerous, especially in front of their friends, because they're trying something at this point with the other males to win their respect because of their powers, their competence. It's a lifelong drive of men. To win the respect of their fellow men for their competence. Now, since competence occasionally means just doing something powerful. I mean, the Sioux Indians in the United States, when they were young teenagers, used to go riding bareback, on horseback, up into the camp of their enemies and just touch them, and then make their way back. Not hurt them, not hit them, just touch them, to show their bravery. So this young fellow, to show his bravery, had smeared, the banana over the car of the headmaster. So I said, all right, now, are you sorry that you did this? He says, yes, I am, Mr. Stenson. I really am. You're right. I shouldn't have done it to you. It was wrong. And he meant it. So I said, all right, why don't you propose something? What would you suggest doing about it? Make me an offer. He said, well, how about if I wash your car? I said, I think that's a great idea. So I got him a soap and bucket, and he went out and he spent the rest of the afternoon washing the car. His friends were there standing. And then he brought the bucket in. I went out, I inspected the car. It was very, very clean. I said, okay, fine, Joe, let's forget about it. All right, tomorrow's another day. And that young fellow has been a great friend of mine all these years. He's a young married man now with kids of his own. He's about your age. An interesting thing happened shortly after he graduated. 3 or 4 years into university, I got a call from him one day. And See, he'd always been a feisty kind of kid. I mean, a lot of teachers, I mean, if I had any hair left, I would have been pulling it out, you know. But it always been kind of a pain in the neck. So what happened was I got a call from him inviting me to have dinner at a very nice French restaurant. And so we met him at this French restaurant in the Loop, the downtown area of Chicago. We went in. It was a tiny little place, sat down, took a look at the menu, and gasped. You know, the prices on there, the price list looked like something out of the national budget, you know. So I said to him, I said, Joe, you can't afford this. And he said, oh, gee, Mr. Stenson, I took 10 years off your life. The least I can do is buy you good dinner. Someday, you see, it does come home to them who have really been the forces for good in their life, who have loved them as they are, and just corrected them because they love them. It does come back to them, if they've been raised that way since they were small. You know, another thing you have to do with these kids is have a sense of humor about dealing with them. It's a big, big help. You know what helps an awful lot is to go back and ask your own parents what you were like as teenagers, and be prepared to have the scales fall from your eyes. All right, your parents will roll their own eyes and say, I mean, you were exactly the same way. You know, you did this, you did that. Things you had repressed. You know, the Freudians say we repress the things that are very embarrassing. But our parents remember them all their lives. And, you know, frequently, I mean, dealing with the teenage problems is like one of those situations, you know, that's just awful to go through, but fun to look back on. So anyway, I've advised parents, you know, when your son, for example, it comes back from getting a haircut, you know, at a barber shop, and he looks absolutely horrid. You know, he looks like something, he's got one of these haircuts, you know, the type they see in the videos and music videos of these Hollywood creatures. You know, a haircut that's sort of the opposite of mine, you know, fuzzy on top, bald around the side. You know, they're wearing clothes that look as rejects from a yard sale someplace. You know, they look like Halloween figures. All right, there's not much you can do about a haircut. You know, let the thing grow out. But to give solace to yourself, I would suggest you do this. And parents have done it and told me it works. Go get your camera. Come back to your teenage son, all right, or your daughter, and just take very close-up pictures, you know? Get the hair, get the clothing, get the look on the face, you know, the sneer. Get them as they are. And then set the pictures aside for 25 years. And just count someday, you know, someday what will happen, your grown-up son will bring by his children. And, you know, have them there. And you can call your grandchildren together, spread out the pictures, and say, do you want to see what your daddy looked like when he was a teenager? And the screams of laughter from your grandchildren will be the sweetest revenge. Another thing you should do is to teach your kids also, to teach them some of the basics about life in the professional world. I would say this especially of you fathers. You know, there is a tendency children have to associate the mother with the upkeep and the quality control of the house. Even if she works out of the house, she's still the person most responsible. She's the force for harmony, for purity, for beauty within the house. The father doesn't quite have the same attitude towards the home. As a matter of fact, you know, they say a man's mind is essentially that of a hunter. You see this when he goes shopping, you know. Women want to make an experience out of shopping. Men approach shopping for a jacket, for example, like hunting an animal. You know, when you hunt, you search out and find the thing, kill it, and bring it home. When men are looking for a jacket, they search out, find it, buy it, and bring it home. They don't want to linger around, doing whatever women do when they're shopping. And so therefore, since men are essentially hunters, whenever they stay put in one place for any length of time, their immediate surroundings resemble a campsite. And it's just something women have to put up with. But the interesting thing is that kids associate their dad, their father, with life outside the family. Even if both parents work outside, the kids tend to think the father is the one who's sort of the person of competence and responsibility and accomplishment out in the world of other grown-ups. That explains why children, starting age 9 with girls and 11 with boys, are drawn more to their father. They want to spend more time with him. They're happy to go anywhere with him. They want to chit-chat with him, just small talk, just to find out the way his mind works. Boys want to find out, essentially, how does a man think? They're conscious of being men. They're getting close to being men. Girls, interestingly, want to know their father. All this is unconscious, of course. They want to know their father to figure out what men are like. They sense that boys are different, men are different from women. They're very acutely conscious of that. But they want to figure out what makes men tick. They want to use their father, as it were, as a Platon, as a model, as an example against which to measure other men. The curious thing is that when girls deeply respect and love their father, when they see that look of affection and protection in their father's eyes, then they are unconsciously attracted to men, suitors, who resemble their father. And they often wind up marrying them. And for some unknown, inexplicable reason, the father and his son-in-law get along quite well. That's why it's so important for men, when they're in their 40s. Remember I told you, the 40s are often, late 30s, early 40s are often a time of insecurity for men. They have increased competition from the bottom. They have, they look in the mirror, as I said. They're conscious their youth is behind them. And this is not easy for a mind that has always valued himself on competence. All right, they see the competence, the ability going down. Interestingly, psychologists have found that after people get through this bump, around age 40, is the most productive and happiest time of life for many men. A 50-year-old certainly has the physique of somebody who's much younger. He has all of this experience on top. So it's just kind of a blip, kind of a valley of shadows that you go through. So many men during that time are oblivious to these overtures of their children to spend time with them. And when a father goes out of his way to spend time, especially with his daughters, right, because starting around age 9, he finds the girls just love being with their father. They love anything he has to tell them. They love looking in his eyes. And I said men should go out of their way and make contact with their daughters, and while we're at it, with their wives as well. To just make eye contact and talk, sit across from them, say to them, I know you're going to grow up to be a great woman. All right, you've got all kinds of wonderful powers, and you've had some problems there. We all have problems, all right? But I know you are going to be a great woman, just like your mother. If you can manage to grow up like her, you're a success. And a dad tells his kids, son, if you can manage someday, somehow, to marry a woman who's as great as your mother, you can count your life a success. I managed to do it, and I pray you do too. But anyway, aside from that, you see, the kids are very receptive. If they get up to be teenagers, 13, 14, 15, you have to teach them some truths about the way things work in the world. Things that we've been talking about here all morning. For instance, you have to teach your kids the importance of integrity and truth-telling and graciousness and considerateness in the workplace. See, the way kids are taught to work in school is not life, let's face it. The business of memorizing things and putting them down on tests is a unique and kind of rarefied experience. Life is not like that. I mean, professional people, as you all know, don't spend time memorizing things. You don't take time taking written tests. We're problem solvers, not test takers. And your kids have to see the broader perspective of what their education, their upbringing is really all about. Tell them this, for example. I think it's true that people who are brought up to be ruthlessly competitive, ironically, wind up at a competitive disadvantage later on. in life. If they are ruthlessly competitive and have nothing but a drive, to get into the best universities and get the best first job, okay, that's all well and good. But what really counts is what happens for the next 50 years after that. What happens inside once the doors have been opened to you and you're in business. You see, our perspective on life has been largely altered by a kind of historic provincialism. There is a tendency for us to think that peace and prosperity are states of nature. Certainly your teenagers will think that. You have to help them to see, what you are well aware of here in Asia. Peace and prosperity are by no means a state of nature. I mean, what we're all going through now at the end of the 1990s is very, very unusual. Peace comes and goes. There may be another war. One may be starting right now, if you look at the headlines, just beginning to simmer. Or, there has been a great economic downturn every 25 years, and another one will come, and they have to be ready for it. So it's not just a matter of getting a job, it's a matter of holding on to one. And a real truth in life is, ethics and integrity are extremely important. You call up the head of any chief executive officer of any company and ask him, what is the most important trait, quality you expect in the people who work for you? They will tell you integrity, trustworthiness. They don't want people working for them whom they cannot trust. And people who are ruthlessly competitive are usually also so pragmatic they don't have a real sense of ethics. And this can damage them, no matter how technically skilled they are. Tell your kids, for example, it works like this. There's a teacher at the Harvard Business School, Harvard's Graduate School of Business Education, Business Administration rather, who put it like this. Imagine you at the center of a bullseye. You're here. Around you are the group of people you know, many or few, your friends, people who like you, respect you, and trust you. Around that are the people whom they know, but you don't. That's where the jobs are. You get a job through the friends of your friends. Or to put it this way, if you lose a job, as some people are going to, okay, the fastest way to get another job is through the friends of your friends. Isn't this true? Mailing out blizzards of resumes is not nearly as good as having friends who like and respect you. People who are ruthlessly competitive don't have many friends. They may have people who are afraid of them, but they don't have people who like them and trust them. The more friends you have, true friends, the better off you are professionally. It's as simple as that. If you're in law, all right, and you're a harsh, hard-spoken, competitive person, ruthlessly competitive, you're going to have trouble getting clients. It's just the way it works. Did you know in the United States, women doctors, women physicians are almost never sued for malpractice? About 98% of the malpractice suits are against men doctors. Do you know why that is? Well, nobody knows quite why, but the most reasonable explanation people have come up with in the field is this. The women doctors, as opposed to the men doctors, are much more inclined to see the patient as a person. As somebody who has a family, who has stresses, who has job worries, worried about their kids, worried about their future, and these things can affect their health. They were raised in a family where, nobody ever got any exercise, so they never learned to exercise, and this is affecting their heart. They see a person in front of them, rather than, as men are more inclined to do, a kind of defective biological specimen, that needs tinkering here and there. And next, the people who sue for libel, people who sue for malpractice are usually reacting, one way or the other, to being treated like things. They're asserting their rights. I do have rights. They're reacting to being treated like things. So just on a professional basis, everything we've been talking about here, getting along with people, respecting them, having considerateness for them, pays off. The moral thing to do is also the smart thing to do. There are many, many instances of this. I heard of a story several years ago. It was in the Wall Street Journal. Some of you may have seen it. There was a woman who was a very, very top executive who worked for the Duquesne Power and Light Company in Pittsburgh. She was an African American, had come from a very, very poor family in the Mississippi Delta. one of several children. There was no father in the family. She had to just make it up on her own. You know, she was the only one in her family who got a university education. It just had to fight for everything she had. Her picture was in Time magazine. You know, she was among the 10 top women executives in the United States. And then what happened was she was being interviewed for a deposition. She was in her mid-50s. And the lawyer who was taking the deposition asked her, I see here on your resume, they have to get the professional credentials down, you know, just as part of their talk. What was, it says here you have an MBA from Stanford, but it doesn't have a year. What year did you get your MBA, please? And lawyers are paid for specifics. They have eyes for details. And so she said it was in the early 70s. Well, you could be more specific, please. You know, was it 71, 72, 73? She said, yeah, it was someplace in there. Could I have a year, please? All right, it was 1973. Fine. He went back to his office and leaned back in his chair and did some thinking, as lawyers are paid to do. And he said, now, wait a second. She's taking this under oath. She has to tell the truth, all right? The penalty is perjury. And she has crawled her way all the way up. The highest educational achievement she got was this MBA from Stanford. Why can't she remember the year of it? Say, if it were I in that position, I'd remember the exact day and all the circumstances of it. So I think you can guess what happened. He did some quick checking, and he found she did not have an MBA from Stanford. She had never been to Stanford. And so the lawyer got together with the president of the company, and they sat down with her, and she admitted, after quite a bit of time, that she had lied. She had puffed up her resume years before by putting down this phony degree. And you see, nobody had ever told her. She had never had a father to tell her, don't lie to your boss. I mean, aside from it's being wrong, it's also stupid. Your boss will, and you know, it's one thing to tell a fib and say there's a check in the mail. All right? It's another thing to lie on your resume. It's the one thing that any company will fire you for on the spot, because you're lying about yourself. You're making yourself out to be a liar. And this is the one thing they won't tolerate. Not only that, but she lied under oath. So she was fired on the spot. And 4 days later, she killed herself. Her career had been everything to her. You know, her accomplishment, her making money, getting ahead, becoming famous, having a picture in the paper. All of that was cut out because she had lacked integrity. She had never learned right from wrong as it applies in the world of people. So there are long-term consequences. And you know, your kids may someday have their jobs saved, their marriages saved, even their lives saved, because they will not do the wrong thing, because that would disgrace their parents. The family has to come first. This is what counts the most. You know, there's an old Russian saying, we move through life as a knife through water, making a fuss as we go along and nothing at all behind. I told you before, at some point grandparents realize, you know, I have a lot of money, I've accumulated quite a bit, I've done a lot with my life, and yet I have nothing to show for it, really. You may work all your life to build up, you know, a solid law practice, and all you have to show for it at the end, all right, is a bank account and a couple of file cabinets filled with papers, or some computer disk with little blips on them. And sooner or later, you know, somebody is going to spend that money, and all of these will be thrown out as so much rubbish. But at that time, you turn to your family, and you say, at least I have done this. All right, I have life living after me that has my blood, has my values. You know, all of the great religions of the world have some kind of mandate in our conscience. Honor your father and your mother. And the finest way we honor father and mother is to internalize the things that were closest to their heart, their own values, their principles, live by them all our lives, and pass them on to our own children whole and intact. That is how we honor father and mother. May I make a suggestion to you here at the close of something that will help you to be a great parent? It is this. If you can, go back and thank your parents. Go back and thank them. If they have passed to their final reward, thank them within you, within your conscience. But if they're still alive, thank them. You know, so many parents go to their graves never hearing their children say thank you, never hearing their children express how much they love them and owe them. You know, you won't just be making your parents' day, as they say. You will, in a real sense, be rounding out their lives in final victory. After all of the struggles that you go through to raise your children to be great men and women, you know when they turn around as they're leaving to go out in the world and they say, thank you for everything, you know you finally won. And it will help you in dealing with your own children, especially your teenagers. There may be times when you have to put your foot down, insist they do the right thing, you know, that you correct them because you love them, and they don't understand that because they're a swirl of emotions and bad judgment. You've got to be able to say within yourself, they don't understand. Someday, I hope they will understand, and they will turn around and thank me. If you need to get the strength to live like a parent like this, may I suggest something to you that many, many people have found never fails to give them strength. Tiptoe into your children's bedroom while they were sleeping and look down on them. Look there, you see the mystery of life. It's almost a sacred religious experience to see. Their blood is going through, you know, their little chests heaving up and down. They have a future in front of them. And you feel the great weight and honor of being called to this great mission as their parents. And you pray, someday they will become masterpieces. And it is my honor to see that that happens. May all of you know the joy, the grace, and the honor all your lives of seeing your sons and daughters grow up to be great men and women. And may your family life be the great adventure that will bring that about. Thank you very much.